Are you a good boy, Chester? Hi, friends and neighbors. Elliot here, Lazy Dogs Records. And I think the vinyl community has a love-hate relationship with one of the uh, typical types of videos that members of the VC and others might put out pretty regularly, and that would be the show you what I got videos. I also enjoy showing people the records I've recently acquired. Uh, it's just, I mean, it goes back to kindergarten, folks. Remember show and tell? That was the highlight of the week when we had show and tell, and we got to bring in stuff and show to our classmates. And so I don't think we ever get too far from kindergarten. I know I did 2 years of kindergarten. I failed kindergarten the first time. So I must have really, really enjoyed it to do it twice. Okay. So I went to, so with no apologies, here I go with my record show and tell. I went to a warehouse not too far from home, about an hour away, where Flipper has just thousands and thousands of records. And occasionally he'll send out some emails to people he knows that collect records that he's going to open up the warehouse. Anybody wants to come go through it and pick up some records, then now's the time to do it. And I've got a table out at a vintage shop in my hometown, and I keep about 600 or 700 records there, which I sell. And it's just trying to make back some of the money that I spend on records. I never make back enough to make up for what I spend by any means, but it helps a little bit. But the bread and butter of a shop like that, of a table like that, is your classic rock. If you don't have classic rock in there, you're not going to get the traffic. And once you get people in there, they're going to buy some of that classic rock, but they're also hopefully are going to pick up some of the other more obscure things that are just stuff that's less run of the mill. But you've got to seed that table with a classic rock. So I'll run up there every 3 or 4 months and buy 100 or 200 records from him at a low price, which I can then clean up, put in new sleeves, and turn around and sell at my shop. So I ended up getting I think it was 112 records that I'm going to do that with. Okay, that was my main purpose of going, but I can't go without buying some records for myself. So after I picked through the basically $2.50 records and got that 112 records, I also I went through where he had his more expensive records, and I went through the jazz and blues section, and I picked up what would be $52, but he is always willing to negotiate a little bit or set a little bit lower price. So I came up with what would be $52 worth of records. I think it's 6 here, and he said, give me 40 for those. So here they are, mostly blues. Hound Dog Taylor and the House Rockers on Alligator Records from 1982. Great artist, great album. I had this on CD years ago, and it's near me at Very Good Plus. Wanted $15 for it, which is a reasonable price on Alligator Records. Hound Dog Taylor. And then this is one you see a lot, an RCA Victor reissue, Lead Belly. I did not have any Lead Belly other than in some compilations, and I really needed it. This is the Midnight Special, which is 16 historic blues and folk recordings by the legendary Huddie Ledbetter, and his 12-string guitar. And that's actually the sleeve there. It's on RCA Victor. And part of a vintage series of jazz and personality and folk, it says. So, you know, the great, you know, you got to have Woody Guthrie and you got to have Lead Belly. I say you don't have to have anything. I say that, but you don't. You have whatever floats your boat. People, don't let anybody tell you you've got to have this record or that record. It's a turn of phrase, I guess, when we say that. Sonny Boy Williams. And this one is One Way Out. And this is on Chess, the vintage series on Chess. Let's see what kind of label they have. Okay. There's your label. Chess Vintage Series. That's when Chess had been bought out. GRT Corp, evidently, was the name. Bought them out, and they, you know, trying to make a profit from the back catalog of Chess records. And hey, what a catalog Chess Records has. Then we get into some of the more sophisticated, more R&B rather than blues. We wanted $8 for this. Big Joe Turner, Rhythm and Blues Years. And this is a 2-record set on Atlantic Records, the premier label for rhythm and blues, I would say. Joe Turner on all the tracks. These are recorded in 51 and 52 and 53 and 54, 56, all the way up to 59. So from 1951 to 1959 are these recordings, and it's reissued in, I don't know what year, but you know, probably it's got a barcode, so probably the late 70s. And then I got a couple of jazz records, and this is a Columbia reissue, probably, and it's a promo copy too. He wanted $10 for this one. Part of the Contemporary Masters series, it says. Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, who I've been getting into a lot lately. These are recordings from 56, and on one side the lineup is Blakey, Watkins on bass, Horace Silver on acoustic piano, Donald Byrd on trumpet, and Hank Mobley on tenor saxophone. Wow, that's a heck of a lineup there. And the rest of the, on the flip side, this was recording later in the year, in the summer, and of course Blakey on the drums, Wilbur Ware on acoustic bass, Kenny Drew on acoustic piano, Donald Byrd on trumpet, and Ira Sullivan on tenor saxophone. So I don't know that second lineup nearly as well. Of course, jazz album I have. My entry into jazz was actually through bluegrass and acoustic music, and one of those artists that kind of crosses into that acoustic music and into, of course, jazz is Stefan Grappelli. Well, this is an Oscar Peterson album called Peterson, and it says featuring Stefan Grappelli, and there is Stefan, and of course Stefan, the violinist from France. And so 2-record set with Oscar Peterson. Oscar on piano, Stefan Grappelli on violin, Nils Herman Ordeston Peterson on bass, Kenny Clark on drums. And this is a 1973 Prestige release. Now, besides those jazz and blues records from the more expensive section of the warehouse, along with picking up all those records that I was going to clean up and sell at my table at the vintage shop, I've got 13. This was real good for me. I got 125 of those inexpensive records. Ended up being about $2.50 a piece, a little less than that. Only 13 of the 125 were records I said, no, I got to keep these myself. Okay. The rest of them are your classic stuff, your Kansas and your Pat Benatar, your Hart, you know, other stuff like Focus and Alice Cooper and things like that. Stuff I can clean up and people will be interested in buying at the shop. But I also got 13 records that that I said, you know, these are going to be for me to keep. Okay, and a couple of them are early Gordon Lightfoot. One of them is from '67, and I think the other is from slightly before that, maybe '66. They're both on United Artists. Lightfoot and The Way I Feel. As I say, both from United Artists. One of the great songwriters of the 20th century, I believe, was Mr. Gordon Lightfoot. And I've got a fairly large collection of Lightfoot albums, but most of them are more from the mid-'70s, early to late '70s, I guess. An album that I've been looking for to pick up, because I've got virtually all, not all probably, but virtually all of Emmylou Harris's albums, but I didn't have her Christmas album. And this is Light of the Stable, the Christmas album. Look at that. Emmylou's just such a gorgeous person. And on Warner Brothers, of course. It came out in 1980. Now, I think it's readily available. It's not like you can't find this album. Don't get me wrong. But I believe it originally came out as an issue in Canada and wasn't distributed in the United States to begin with. And then later it started appearing in the United States. So maybe it's not quite, you don't see it as much as you do Elite Hotel or you know, Quarter Moon to 10 Cent Town or anything like that. But they're out there. I highly recommend them if you need something to play at Christmas or any time. I've got a fondness for the old duo acts in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and one of the first duo acts was the Monroe Brothers. Early bluegrass music. This is not bluegrass, despite the name. They put that name on the album to hopefully sell more copies. Bluegrass began with the Monroe Brothers 30 odd years ago. This is not bluegrass though. This is and this is on RCA Camden. You know, issued in '63. This is, you know, the brother acts. In this case, mandolin and guitar and harmony vocals. And I have this album already, but my copy was not a very good copy. So for $2.50, I figured I'd take a chance. Maybe this would be an upgrade as far as copy condition. And then I got this one, and it doesn't have hardly any of the same songs. They put out, mostly on Bluebird, a whole lot of music in the 1930s, starting about 33, I believe, before they broke up in 39, I think. So there's another. Monroe Brothers. Feast Here Tonight, Bluebird. And there's the old label we're used to seeing. 2 record set from the Monroe Brothers. And really looking forward to getting this cleaned up and listened to. And then getting into some actual bluegrass. Tortoise Rider needs to tell me if he's familiar with Buddy's place. He grew up in Knoxville, I believe. This is a band called Knoxville Grass Live. I always like to pick up these regional bluegrass band albums. And it's live at Buddy's. And it looks like, it don't have a year on here, but it looks like, oh, here it is, 1980. Yeah, it looks like around 1980. And Buddy's Barbecue, Knoxville Grass, recording a live album here Friday and Saturday, it says there. And there's the band, and I like here the cast of characters down below. Now, I wasn't familiar with any of the names. None of these guys, as far as I know, went on to a long career in bluegrass, and they actually have drums in here, which is a no-no. They were playing in a bar, so you got to project a little better, electric bass and drums, in order to cut through the revelry in a bar. But they've got the cast of characters here. And of course it's got the proprietor of Buddy's, his wife, the waitresses, there's the waitresses, you know, and not to be confused with the band, the waitresses. The producer, the cook, the engineer, the MC, the cameraman. It's got the girlfriend, the other wife, the bodyguard, the other girlfriend, the second girlfriend, the third girlfriend, the friend, the string man, the fan, the right fielder, the tailor, the duck, the nurse, another waitress, the starlet, and the other friend. I love that. A lot of humor in that cover. So Knoxville Grass. Anybody know anything about this band? Please share in the note, the post down below. Another thing about this is, oftentimes bands, bluegrass bands, when they put out an album, their goal, of course, they wanted to record, obviously, but they also, you know, they needed something that they could supplement what they were making, playing, you know, festivals and clubs, and they could increase their cash flow. So oftentimes those albums made by local bluegrass bands would be full of standards, you know, Orange Blossom Special, Foggy Mountain Breakdown, things like that, because, you know, a casual fan at a club or at the festival merch table, oh, cool, this has got Orange Blossom Special on it, yeah, and they might be more prone to get it. But this album has, it looks like, either their own compositions or stuff that wasn't, you know, wasn't the usual fare. Okay. Now, if anybody that's watched my channel knows how much of a Ralph Stanley and Stanley Brothers fan I am, but I was very fortunate to pick up some music from the Rebel years, Ralph Stanley's Rebel years in the early mid 1970s, and got Cry from the Cross, and they said they would record these albums in the studio, and I think in Maryland is where they recorded at Rebel, and which was a guy's basement, basically, the recording studio. They would record, and then they would just get out in the car after they finished the recording and go riding around looking for a good place to do a cover shot. And you know, if it were a religious song album, this is Cry from the Cross, and this is all gospel music on this particular bluegrass album. And they went out and they found this cross out in the field somewhere. Just, you know, had their suits on. They ran out there to the field, got the camera out, and got their picture. And that was the artwork for the album. And here's another one, A Man and His Music. This one's from '74 on Rebel. Rebel was a one-man operation when it started. It became very successful as an independent record label. And Ralph Stanley, Old Time Place. This doesn't have the Clinch Mountain Boys in the title here, but they're there. Now, this one is from '76, and it features a very young Keith Whitley singing baritone vocals and playing on the album, playing rhythm guitar. There's Ralph. And finally, Ralph Stanley. This has the band on the title, the Clinch Mountain Boys. Once again, ride around until you find a good spot. Get out there, make sure your tie's on straight. Put the sports coat on and take the picture, and you got your cover. Clinch Mountain Gospel, and this is from '77. And Curly Ray Klein, I think on all these, he's the fiddler. He was a longtime fiddler for Ralph. Keith Whitley is on this one too. Renfro Prophet is on guitar on this one. And I mentioned, let's see, yeah, the lead vocals on this one and the first one I showed is Roy Lee Centers, guitar and lead vocals. He's one of the first lead vocalists after Ralph's brother Carter passed away, out of Ohio. And tragically, Centers was a great vocalist. He grew up as a kid, playing the bars in Ohio, in those old manufacturing towns like Dayton, I think in particular. But got in an argument with somebody one night, and there was an altercation, and he was murdered, sadly. Nobody ever convicted. They knew who did it, but never. The guy claimed self-defense or something and was able to get out of it. And then 3 more bluegrass albums. One of the very popular bands for a long time in bluegrass, the Nashville Bluegrass Band, Idle Time, and this one's autographed with liner notes from John Hartford. This is from probably the end of the vinyl heyday, 1986 on Rounder Records, and a great band, Nashville Bluegrass Band, was Alan O'Brien on the banjo, Pat Enright on guitar, Mike Compton on mandolin, Mark Hembry on bass, and Stuart Duncan on fiddle. And it looks like all of them have signed this. Okay. And another one of the great bands in bluegrass, Hot Rise, Traditional Ties. Notice the cover. they got the everything else is in black and white, and they got the ties in color. That looks good. Hot Rise, really great Colorado-based band, and again, great players in there. Tim O'Brien was leader of Hot Rise. Nick Foster on bass. Pete Wernick on banjo. He's written a lot of banjo instructional books. And Charles Saltell on guitar. So, Hot Rise. There's a bunch of ties there. Traditional Ties, that one's called. And finally, the last one appears to have come from either a radio station or probably radio station. This is Glenn Duncan, fiddler, excellent fiddler, on Turquoise Records. And this one is, and again, it's this late 80s, so it is, they're highlighting the fact that it is digitally mixed and mastered. I don't know that we would want to highlight that today. But Glenn's on the fiddle, of course. Roland White plays some guitar and mandolin on here. Roy Husky Jr. on acoustic bass. So he's got a lot of heavy hitters here. And the album itself is called Sweet Water. Sweet Water. One of the great fiddlers in bluegrass. And I think he's done a lot of session work over the years. And this is a promotional copy as well. Yep, it's got the gold embossed there, and you can tell it was at a radio station. So I got some really good bluegrass and folk music and some jazz and some blues. Really a good haul, I believe, from my visit to the Flippers Warehouse. So that's show and tell, folks. Love it or hate it, it is what it is. I will talk to everybody later. Remember, people, be kind to your neighbors, because we're all neighbors.